So I just want to first of all say, like I was guided this morning in my meditation to first of all just say how remarkable the CMC is and all of us. And this was my guidance to really share about this, is that, 2,000 years ago, Jesus walked the planet and the human civilization got his message wrong. Like they messed it up. And so in 1965, they had to rechannel it. And we're kind of like, we are like the explorers. We're the ones that first went out on the Mayflower and all those different ships to bring it to our people. So the very fact that we can all sit here and talk about this amazing teaching, which is, to many folks, is really scary. But we're all those miracle workers that have been called by Spirit to come and begin this reinterpretation, really, of what the original message was. So, I just have to acknowledge all of us as these miracle workers and for being on the vanguard. We're the explorers that go out into the wilderness and bring this teaching. And sometimes, we get really welcoming and sometimes we don't. But we're doing it. And the other thing, I just want to express my personal gratitude for all of you being here, because, I do spend a lot of time working on these talks. Most of the time, I make it in my magazine. I make that kind of time, and it's just nice that people show up. It really is. Although I'm totally getting my guidance is that I'm doing this for myself too. This is when I get in these talks and I get, oh wow, I didn't know that. I didn't see this, But the fact that people show up is really a gift of love to me. So I just want to say thank you to everyone for that. Okay, so the title of my talk today is Communication as a Means to Miracles. And as I've kind of talked before, it's like sometimes, this talk is totally came from the Spirit, because I thought to myself, gosh, communication is really so important, and yet I've never really addressed it in a talk before, specifically. And I thought, wow, that this is really just something that I guess Spirit wants me to also be aware of in terms of how I go about my business. Now, I think, ever since Sigmund Freud kind of exposed, I think a lot of people acknowledge that he is the psychoanalyst who really exposed the inner workings of the ego and defense mechanisms, that people have really identified that communication is such a huge, huge piece of bringing peace to the world and or conflict and really great deals of problems. And if you think about it, communication impacts us at every level. The Course speaks about the different levels and how we sometimes have different levels of communication which cause conflict. And this includes both our own spiritual communication with Holy Spirit or Jesus or God, but it also impacts us at our own levels. Just think about it. I think we can all reflect upon our own lives. Communication impacts our personal lives and our personal relationships. It impacts our work relationships. If you've ever been someone that has been a leader of a band or leader of a group of some sort in your workplace, you know how important it is when you communicate with that group. Okay, it's very important, because when you make a mistake, you realize it. It really impacts that whole group. And then just think about diplomats. Any truly very good diplomat is trained in the inner workings of that culture which he or she or they are being a diplomat to. We all know that if you go to another country and you misinterpret a gesture, or if you don't understand their history, you can make serious blunders. From my own experience, I can remember, I meet with a lot of families, and I work as a teacher in San Francisco as part of my job. I'm a case manager, so I hold a lot of meetings. And one of the schools I taught with many years had 50% Chinese population. And one of the things that we just kind of learned over time was, in communicating with those families and those students, is that oftentimes making eye contact in the Chinese culture is not considered appropriate. It's actually kind of like a threat or an aggressive measure, okay? So, the teachers learn that if a student, or even if their family comes in and they don't make eye contact, that wasn't to be interpreted negatively on your part. And in fact, if you said to a student, you're being disrespectful, actually you were creating conflict with them. So my point is that communication is happening all the time. And so it's really something I think that we ought to be just aware of as we go about our study of A Course in Miracles. So I'm going to steal from Reverend Tony here a little bit. I looked up communication in the Course in Miracles concordance, and the root word communication occurs over 200 times in the Course in Miracles in its various teachings. So clearly, Holy Spirit wants us to pay attention to this. It also comes in the very first chapter, and is one of the miracle principle number 30. By recognizing spirit, miracles adjust to the levels of perception and show them in proper alignment. This places spirit at the center where it can communicate directly. So, to me, what A Course in Miracles is telling us, if we were to bring miracles and healing into our own minds, and also to those who Spirit has chosen for us to help heal, then we have to make a conscious connection to Spirit. Like, we have to make that decision, that choice. And so, my thought about this part of it today was okay, how do we do this? How do you do it, right? How do I do this connection with Spirit? So, I have to give props to Reverend Tony again. For me, the healing team has become part of this routine in my morning. So, one of the things that I do is that I read, Reverend Tony's little coaching paragraph there. I read the lesson that's provided, and then I have my own little prayer that I do and read through the list and do that. So that's part of it. That's part of my process. That may be part of yours, but it's just part of my process. I also do my own thing, I do this thing where sometimes I use a summarized version of the decision prayer, decision making. There's a chapter 31 in A Course in Miracles. There's a section called making decisions, and it says, well, decide what kind of day that you want to have. So, on some days what I do is I just say, I want to have a day of miracles, a day of healing, a day of forgiveness, a day of productivity, a day of creativity. I just kind of put it out there. And so what I'm trying to do is set my mind to be in the miracle framework, right? Miracle frame of mind. And what I find that in the course of my day, that oftentimes I'm not always conscious in the moment to ask for a miracle in the moment, but it seems like the way my mind works, that Holy Spirit, provides me with, I notice that I'm just in better, I just respond to, and notice I said respond to situations better during the day when I do that, as opposed to reacting, right? Respond as opposed to react. When we respond, like the responsibility prayer, we're coming from Spirit. Okay, now, so one thing is we set our minds to Holy Spirit. Another big concept that we all know about communication that is also in the Course in Miracles is listening. I stole from Reverend Tony again. I looked up listening in the concordance, and listening, the root word listening, is referred to over 150 times in A Course in Miracles. Okay? Now, as a teacher, a couple years ago, I assigned myself to teach the curriculum in my school, college and career education. And, one of the things that unbeknownst to me, was there was a unit in there on communication, actually, and talked about all kinds of different, mistakes that people make in communication, and also how to communicate properly, right? And so one of the things that I learned in this unit is that when people are talking to one another, most of the time what we're doing is we're thinking of our response. Okay, we're thinking, what are we going to say next, right? That's what we're thinking. And we're not really truly listening. And so one of the things that this unit, which we practice with the students, and of course I was also practicing it myself, was teaching them how to actively listen. And I thought wow, this is really amazing. And so, one of the things, and I think a lot of us in here have learned this through life. I know I'm preaching to the choir, if you will, here. But one of the things it said was, of course, read body language, which I think many of us in here know this and have done this throughout our lives. But another thing is it was saying you actually kind of do this note-taking as you're listening to the other person. So they were saying that train yourself that as you're listening to the person, kind of restate what they said to you. And, kind of summarize it every once in a while so you know. Now I know that some of us in this room have been, maybe we've been to psychotherapy, maybe we've been to couples therapy. Like for myself, I work as a case manager with students. And so when I'm effective, what I do is, oftentimes I have students come into my office and they're upset about something or they have a concern. So I listen to them and then I say, okay, so what I hear you saying is this. And I restate it to them. Because number one, a lot of times with teenagers, when they're coming to you, they're upset. Their emotions are elevated, right? And so just by letting them get it out and then restating it, kind of just validates that I've heard them and that I think I heard what they were saying. And if not, then they can also correct me. So it's kind of part of the healing process that takes place. So it's really, really important. Now listen to what the Course in Miracles says about listening. This is from the psychotherapy pamphlet. Who then decides what each brother needs? Surely not you, who do not yet recognize who he is who asks. There is something in him that will tell you if you listen. And that is the answer. Listen. Do not demand. Do not decide. Do not sacrifice. Listen. And what's interesting there? So in this quote from the psychotherapy pamphlet, it says listening 3 times in this one quote. 3 times. And the last time that it's said, it's the full sentence. It's just listen, period. So, the Course in Miracles is really telling us that this is an important part of communicating miracles. We have to stop, ourselves sometimes and listen to what spirits say. It's a conscious choice, just going back to the first idea that I talked. It's conscious. We have to stop and listen, right? Now, the other thing I want to say is, we all are psychotherapists, okay, from the Course's mind. The Course talks to us about that. Yes, this pamphlet can apply to psychotherapists, Reverend Vincent, okay? But all of us, as we know, I think in here, and those of us that are watching live streaming and all that, know that there are people that come to us who are in need of healing. Sometimes it's just a brief instant, it's someone we meet on the street, and sometimes it's people that come to us and we know that they're looking for that healing, they're in need, they're in distress, and they come to us. And so the thing that is kind of important for us to think about is that be cautious about reacting right away. Take time to pause and listen, and then respond from spirit. I'll give you an example of this. One time, as I said, I'm a teacher, and I oftentimes teach students that have emotional and behavioral challenges, students that have been really traumatized. And so the student who had some real significant traumas in her life came into class one day, and I said, "Good morning, how you doing?" "I'm doing terrible. I hate this class, and I want to kill myself." Okay? Now, you're presented with this information, and I also know the students, so I know in context, that they didn't really she didn't really want to kill herself, but I also knew that she was in some kind of distress. And so I waited for a second, and I responded, and I said, "Oh, it sounds like you're having a really hard day. How are you feeling?" And, she said, "Well, I'm feeling really angry because I just have these hard days a lot, And then she just relaxed. Like you could see her body just relax. Like, it was, so my guidance was basically get to the feeling underneath the kind of labeling of what was happening to her. And it just gave her permission to go a little bit deeper and to express it. Now, I didn't think of all this ahead of time. I just waited, paused, and then responded. And so again, it's just like, I'm sure that to me, because of the outcome, that was inspired. Holy Spirit, like the love just can come through me, and I was able to, kind of provide that. And what was the outcome? Is that she was able to relax in class, and that she was able to do her algebra that day. And so to me, that was me coming from Spirit. I won't tell you the examples when I come from ego. So, in this communication process, let's also look, what does the ego want to do? Not that I'm not even condemning the ego, but a lot of times when people come to us, we want to fix them, right? We want to fix them. The idea is there's something wrong, so we want to fix them, and we want to try to say, oh, you shouldn't feel like that. I hate that when I get that response. You shouldn't feel like that. That's great. Well, you know what? That's how I feel at the moment. But, or the ego, what is the ego? All right, that's too much. I want to get out of here. Like, let's get out of the classroom. Let's not respond. Let's not validate anything. So fix it, abandon it. And here's another one that we do. And again, this is all innocent. We're not judging anyone. But Reverend Larry, bless his soul, comes to mind. And remember what Reverend Larry would always caution us against. Don't be the victim. Don't validate the victim, right? And so, sometimes our temptation is to join into the victimization. Yes, the student had many traumas, believe me, in her life. And so on and so forth. But it wasn't time for me to go into that and to do that. Or if a person is suffering, it wasn't time for me to, necessarily to join in that way. But Spirit will help us to be with that person and support that person if we open our minds to that and not validate the victimization necessarily. So how we respond, we all know this. Sometimes we respond just with a kind word. I'm sorry that you're going through that. Is there anything I can do to support you? Sometimes we just do that. Sometimes it's just a smile. Sometimes it's just a gesture. But it's important for us as I think for Course in Miracles students, like it said today in the lesson, don't make the situation real. Okay? That doesn't mean validate what's happening for them, but don't make it real. See them, even if it's just in your mind, see them as innocent, see them as whole, and see them as capable of receiving the miracle. I think it's a really, really important part of it when we're presented with healing situations and healing opportunities. Okay, now part of the reading today that Reverend Tony did says this. The constant going out of his love is blocked when his channels are closed. And he is lonely when the minds he created do not fully communicate with him. And this is the other part, like as the miracle worker, that's important for us, right? Is that we're more effective when we keep our channels open, right? So we, as the miracle workers, for our own healing, also need to realize that, it's our responsibility to work on our own channels. If we are in resentment, if we're in grievance, if we're in judgment, if we're in condemnation, anger, bitterness, yes, that's part of our healing, but it's also part of our responsibility to heal that as well. Because I don't know about you, but my experience is when I'm in those states of mind, it's an opportunity to heal, it's an opportunity to get support, but it's also a responsibility too. Because, like, just for me, in the particular job that I have, you know, I can't go into work in anger and frustration because of the level of distress that the students I work with have. Like, that's just my reality, okay? It's just the way it is. So I really have to, as much as I can, work on my own self. And I do, you know, I do have, obviously I have, you know, I have my issues and I have my grievances. I'll share experience the other day. You know, we don't have an administrator on site, so because I have a lot of experience where I'm working, we do have an administrator, but he's often off-site. And I had to act as an administrator, and it was a particular area that I just didn't feel as competent in, and I wasn't feeling up to par that particular day. About a student that was suspended and meeting them at their meeting. So I went into one of the rooms and I called him. I left a message on his phone, you know, and it was a frustrated message, you know. I was angry. And I didn't say anything horrible, but I just said, hey, you need to be here more. You know, I'm really tired of doing, you know, this job. It's not really the job I'm supposed to be doing, you know. So it wasn't horrible, but that wasn't the miracle, I think, that the Holy Spirit was, you know, asking for. Next day he came in and we talked about it and we cleared it up. But that is an example where, you know, we just have to be ready to be doing this. So how is it that we clear our channels? How do you do it, right? Just for yourself, just know we're all different. We all have different ways of doing it. For me, sometimes it's at morning practice. Sometimes it's my Thursday Night Miracles group where we come and we just share some of our experiences. Sometimes it's talking to someone, sometimes it's writing. But we have to be kind of like aware of this. Now, the last thing I want to talk about related to our communication of miracles is the topic of judgment. And this also comes up in the psychotherapy pamphlet. And it says this: it is the instant that the therapist forgets to judge the patient that healing occurs. All right? Let me say that again. It is the instant that the therapist forgets to judge the patient that healing occurs. Now when I say judgment, we all think of what? We think of condemnation, right? We think of criticism. We think, oh, you should do this, the tyranny of the shoulds. And that's important to know that. But I think the other thing that Course in Miracles is telling us is also to get our specialness out of the way. A lot of times in especially our close relationships, we are also not conscious of our own special needs. And what is it that we want to get out of this relationship, right? You know, the seek and do not find. So sometimes we're in our ego mind and we're trying to negotiate, oh, this person is vulnerable, maybe I can get something from this person, whatever it may be. Maybe it's just like the Course says, remember, comparisons are not expressions of love. Maybe it's even feeling like, oh, this person's in a bad situation, that makes me feel better. That is not healing. And we're coming from that perspective, our healing is not going to be as pure as it could be. So it's just kind of something to keep in mind as we're kind of looking at this. So as miracle workers, as healers of our own minds, and especially of going out there, like I said, we are the pioneers, folks. We're the ones going out into the world and bringing this to the world. Jesus and Holy Spirit have chosen us to do this and to bring this work. And a lot of minds are not open to it. But if we choose to accept our mission, we will be rewarded. And that's my talk for today.